The blade kissed my throat, cold steel against warm flesh, and the entire Iron Ridge pack held its breath, waiting for their alpha to give the final command. But Silas's hand froze. Trembling, his wolf tore through his consciousness with a single word that shattered everything. Mate. I knelt in the center of the ancient stone circle, my wrists bound with silver-laced rope that seared my skin like liquid fire. My blonde hair was matted with blood. I didn't beg. I didn't weep. Even facing death, my eyes remained defiant. You murdered Clara Thorne. Silas's voice carried across the mountain peak like a death knell. My betrothed. Your future Luna. For this crime, Pack law demands your life. The executioner raised the heavy silver claymore. It gleamed crimson in the firelight. Silas lifted his hand. The signal. The blade descended with a whistle of wind, and stopped exactly 1 inch from my throat. The scent hit him then. Honeysuckle and wild rain. Every instinct in his body screamed one impossible truth. This woman he was about to kill was his fated mate. The pack erupted into chaos because their alpha had just broken the most sacred law of the North American territories. Before we continue, hit like and subscribe. Trust me, this story only gets better. Drop your state in the comments and let's see how far Elena and Silas's story travels. Now, let's get into it. The Virginia sky was bruised purple and orange, a violent tapestry of colors that seemed to mirror the turmoil in my heart. The autumn wind howled through the jagged pines of the Blue Ridge Mountains, carrying the scent of pine needles and coming snow. Usually, this time of year meant the Harvest Festival, a time of bonfires, cider, and celebration. But tonight, the Iron Ridge Pack had gathered for a different kind of ritual. They came to watch me die. My name is Elena Vance. For 23 years, I had been the invisible ghost of this pack. An Omega. In our world, rank is everything, and I was at the very bottom. I was the girl who scrubbed the floors of the Great Hall, the one who survived on the meager leftovers of the warriors, the one who slept in a drafty shack on the edge of the territory. I was the girl people looked through, never at. I had spent my life trying to be as small and quiet as possible, hoping that if I didn't cause trouble, the world would leave me alone. But 3 days ago, the world decided it was done leaving me alone. 3 days ago, I became the most hated woman in the territory, a murderer. I knelt on the jagged, frost-slicked rocks of the Judgment Circle, an ancient formation of stones at the very summit of the mountain. The air was thin and biting, making my lungs ache with every breath. But that pain was nothing compared to the agony of the silver-laced ropes binding my wrists behind my back. To a werewolf, silver is more than just a poison. It is a fundamental violation of our spirit. It felt like liquid lead was being pumped directly into my veins, a dull, throbbing roar that clouded my vision and made the world tilt on its axis. I looked out at the faces of the pack. There were nearly 1,000 of them, gathered in a massive semicircle, their eyes reflecting the flickering light of the ceremonial torches. These were people I had known my whole life. I had babysat their pups when they were too busy with the hunt. I had brought extra blankets to the elders when the heaters in the communal cabins failed during the blizzard of 18. I had lived among them, served them, and in my own quiet way, loved them. Now, they looked at me with nothing but hunger. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a sacrifice. Clara Thorne had been their golden girl, the daughter of a powerful lineage and the promised mate of our alpha. Her death had left a hole in the pack that they were desperate to fill with my blood. Bring forth the alpha, the elder Elias commanded. His voice was sharp as a hawk's cry, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Elias was a man of 70, his face a map of wrinkles and old scars, but his eyes were as cold and calculating as they had been 30 years ago when he helped consolidate the Blackwood power. The crowd parted like a dark, shifting sea. Silas Blackwood stepped into the flickering firelight. Silas was a force of nature. At 6'4", he was a mountain of muscle and ancestral duty. His dark hair was windswept, and his amber eyes, usually so warm when they looked at his people, were now glowing with a terrifying, cold light. He was the most powerful alpha in the tri-state area, a man whose word could move mountains and whose growl could stop a heart. Tonight, he was also a man drowning in a sea of grief and rage. Standing just a step behind him was Julian Thorne, Clara's brother. Julian's face was a masterpiece of performative agony. He held a handkerchief to his eyes, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. But as his gaze flickered to mine for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. I saw it, a flash of pure, cold triumph. In that moment, the realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just being executed for a crime I didn't commit, I was being silenced for a truth I didn't yet understand. Elena Vance, Silas said. The weight of his alpha command slammed into me, demanding submission. It vibrated in my very marrow, making my head bow even as I fought to keep my eyes on him. You stand accused of the highest treason. Clara Thorne, daughter of the Thorne line and my betrothed, was found in your cabin 3 nights ago. Her throat was torn open. You were found standing over her body, the ritual dagger of the Thorne family in your hand, her blood painting your skin like a gowl. I didn't do it, Silas, I whispered. My voice felt like it was made of broken glass, raw and fragile, but I refused to let it shake. I wanted him to see me. For the first time in my life, I wanted the Alpha to actually look at the girl he was about to kill. I found her in the woods near the creek. She was dying. I carried her back to my cabin because I had the herbs. I tried to save her. The evidence says otherwise. Silas backed, his voice echoing off the surrounding peaks like thunder. The sentries found you with the blade. The blood on your hands is hers. There was no one else there, Elena. No one else with a motive to kill a girl who had done nothing but show you kindness. He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising. For the murder of the lunar elect, for the theft of our pack's future, and for the betrayal of the very ground you walk on, pack law demands your life. Do you have anything more to say before the blade falls? I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the hollows under his eyes, the way his hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He was hurting. He wanted an end to the pain, and he thought my death would provide it. I didn't do it, I said, my voice stronger now. And if you kill me tonight, you'll be letting her real murderer walk free among you. Is that the legacy you want, Silas? A pack built on a lie. Silas's jaw tightened. He turned away, unable or unwilling to meet my gaze. Miller, he called out. Miller, the pack's lead executioner, stepped forward. He was a mountain of a man who had seen too many deaths. He reached down and gripped my matted blonde hair, yanking my head back with a brutal jerk to expose the curve of my throat. The silver claymore in his hand was heavy, ancient, and stained with the shadows of 100 years of justice. I closed my eyes. I didn't think of the pack anymore. I thought of my mother, who had died when I was just a child, her last words a frantic, fevered whisper that I was more than I seemed. I thought of the small patch of honeysuckle I'd tended behind my shack, the way it smelled after a summer rain. I thought of the dreams I'd had of leaving this valley, of seeing the ocean, of being more than just an omega. Silas raised his hand. The signal. The pack fell into a silence so absolute you could hear the distant cry of a nocturnal bird and the frantic, hummingbird beat of my own heart against my ribs. Execute, heir, Silas commanded. I felt the sudden rush of air as the massive blade swung down. I braced for the cold bite of steel, for the final darkness. Clang! The sound of metal hitting bone and flesh erupted, but there was no pain in my neck. I gasped, my eyes flying open. Silas's hand had shot out with inhuman speed, his fingers locking around Miller's massive wrist. The blade stopped exactly 1 inch from my skin. I could feel the cold hum of the silver radiating against my throat, a phantom vibration that made my hair stand on end. Silas was rigid, his entire body trembling as if he were holding back an avalanche. His eyes, they weren't amber anymore. They were a swirling, molten gold, the pupils blown wide as his wolf took total, primal control of his body. Alpha! Miller gasped, his voice straining under the pressure of Silas's grip. The command was given. Why do you stay the blade? Justice must be served. Silas didn't answer him. He wasn't even looking at Miller. He was staring at me, his nostrils flaring as he took in a deep, lung-filling breath. For the first time in 23 years, Silas Blackwood was really seeing me. He was smelling the scent that had been suppressed by the silver ropes and the filth of the holding cells, honeysuckle and wild rain, a scent so pure and ancient it shouldn't belong to a girl like me. Mate, his wolf growled. It wasn't a word spoken by a man. It was a primal vibration that tore out of his chest, a sound so raw and powerful that the front row of the pack recoiled in shock. The word rippled through the air, changing the very molecules of the night. Silas. Elias, the elder, scrambled forward, his face twisting in horror.
What are you doing? This is a murderer. The law is the law.
You cannot let a base instinct override the blood of Clara Thorne. Finish this. Silas didn't move.
He was staring at my collarbone.
Under the grime and blood, a mark was beginning to glow, a faint, ethereal silver brand that mirrored the one suddenly burning like white-hot iron on his own chest.
The mate mark.
The one thing in our world that cannot be faked, cannot be ignored, and cannot be denied. She lives, Silas spit out.
The words sounded like they were being ripped from his throat with a pair of pliers.
She is a killer. Julian Thorne screamed, rushing toward the circle, his face purple with a sudden, panicked rage.
She slaughtered my sister.
You would spare the woman who ruined your life because of a chemical pull? You are weak, Silas.
You are compromised.
If you won't kill her, I will. Julian lunged for Guard's sword, but Silas turned on him with a speed that defied the eye. The air around the Alpha seemed to thicken, his aura expanding like a physical shockwave. It was so potent, so authoritative, that the warriors in the crowd involuntarily dropped to their knees, their heads bowed in forced submission to his rank. I said, "She lives," Silas roared, his voice a thunderclap that silenced the entire mountain. "The execution is stayed.
The bond is recognized.
Take her to the high-security cells beneath the manor. I will personally oversee the re-investigation. If she is guilty, she will die. But no wolf executes my mate without my absolute, unwavering certainty." As the guards hauled me up, my legs felt like they were made of water. My head was spinning from the toxic silver in my blood and the sheer impossibility of the last 60 seconds.
I looked back at Silas one last time.
He stood in the center of the circle, his fists clenched at his sides, looking like a man who had just been handed a death sentence of his own.
He hated me.
He believed I had murdered the woman he was supposed to love. And now, the very soul of his wolf was tethered to mine for eternity.
The dungeons of the Blackwood Manor were not like the holding cells in the village.
These were ancient, carved directly into the limestone heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains over a century ago. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, old iron, and the faint, copper tang of blood, a reminder of the pack's darker history. They threw me into a cell reinforced with rowan wood, which naturally dampens a shifter's strength, and bars plated in heavy silver. I sat in the corner, huddled on a thin, musty pile of straw, my body trembling with a cold that went deeper than the stone floor. The silver ropes had been removed, but the poisoning remained. My skin was blackened and raw at the wrists, the pain radiating up to my elbows in sharp, electric stabs.
I didn't know how much time had passed.
In the windowless dark, minutes stretched into hours, and hours felt like days. I replayed the night of Clara's death over and over, searching for the detail I must have missed. I had been gathering late-season herbs in the Blackwood thicket, the only place where the rare moonshadow root grew, when I heard it. A sound like a heavy weight crashing through the underbrush, followed by a wet, gurgling sob that made my blood run cold.
I had found her near the creek.
Clara Thorne, the beautiful, golden girl of the pack, was sprawled in the mud. Her throat, it hadn't been a clean cut.
It was a jagged, horrific ruin.
She had reached for me, her fingers staining my tunic with red, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the fear of death. She had tried to speak, her lips moving frantically, but only blood had come out.
Then, she had pointed.
Not toward the woods, but back toward the manor.
Why? The voice shattered my memory like a stone through glass.
I looked up.
Silas was standing outside the bars.
He was still in his ceremonial black suit, but his tie was gone and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the raw, glowing edges of the mate mark on his chest. He looked haunted, the shadows under his eyes deeper than they had been on the mountain. "Why what, Silas?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why would you kill her?" He stepped closer, his fingers hovering just inches from the silver bars. His wolf was pacing behind his eyes, a restless, golden shadow that wanted to reach through the cage.
"She was the only one who ever looked out for the Omegas. She was kind to you when no one else was.
She gave you clothes, she gave you food. Why betray that?" "She was my friend," I said, a single tear finally breaking free and tracking a path through the dirt and dried blood on my cheek. She used to come to my cabin in secret, Silas. She brought me books. She told me about the cities beyond the mountains. I loved her more than anyone in this pack ever did, because she was the only one who didn't look at me with disgust. Silas growled, a low, dangerous sound that vibrated in the small cell. And yet, you were found over her, holding the Thorn family dagger. Julian saw you with his own eyes. Julian is lying, I said, crawling toward the bars, ignoring the way my head throbbed.
Think about it, Silas. I am an Omega.
I have no standing, no strength, no reason to kill my only protector. Julian and the guards arrived within seconds.
How did they know exactly where we were?
They were already in the woods. They were waiting for me to find her. Silas slammed his hand against the stone wall beside the bars, the sound echoing like a gunshot. My wolf doesn't care about your logic, Elena. My wolf wants to tear these bars out of the foundation and claim you until you can't breathe.
But my heart is still in that grave with Clara.
Do you have any idea what this is doing to me? To be fated by the universe to the woman who stole my future.
He reached through the bars.
It was a gesture of pure, unconscious instinct, a pull he couldn't fight. His fingers brushed my cheek, wiping away the tear. The contact was like a bolt of white-hot lightning. A vision flashed through my mind, not mine, but his. I saw a memory of a younger Silas, standing by a mountain lake, being told by an old pack seer that his true mate was a faded soul, someone he would likely never find in this lifetime. I felt his years of bone-deep loneliness, the way he had settled for Clara not out of a soul bond, but out of a desperate need for companionship and the duty to produce an heir. And then, I felt his current agony. The mate bond was trying to overwrite his grief with a blinding, primal need to protect me. It was a war of the soul, and it was tearing him apart. Don't, I whispered, pulling back into the shadows. You still think I'm a monster. You can't touch me while you believe that I slaughtered a girl who was like a sister to me. Silas stared at his hand as if it belonged to a stranger. I think, he said, his voice dropping to a shade of amber that looked like burnt sugar, that the wounds on Clara's neck didn't look like they came from a dagger. I spent 3 hours in the morgue tonight, looking at the body while the pack slept. A dagger makes a clean slice. Those wounds, they were ragged. Like someone used their claws, then planted the dagger in her hand to make it look like a ritual killing.
My heart leaped in my chest.
Then you know it wasn't me. I know that someone in my inner circle is a traitor, Silas said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. And if they were willing to kill Clara to frame an Omega, they aren't going to stop until the truth is buried with you. The pack is outside right now, Elena.
Julian is inciting a riot in the square.
They want your head on a spike, and if I don't give it to them, they'll take mine too. Then let them, I said, my voice suddenly cold and certain. If I'm going to die, I'd rather it be because you couldn't save me, not because you were the one who swung the blade. If you believe in the bond, Silas, then find the person who really killed her. Silas stared at me for a long time, the silence in the dungeon heavy with the weight of the things we couldn't say. Finally, he turned to leave. I've sent Sarah to you. She's the only healer I trust to treat those silver burns without reporting it to the council. Stay away from the bars, Elena. Not everyone who comes to this door tonight will be looking for the truth. By the next morning, the Iron Ridge pack was on the verge of open rebellion. From the small, high vent in my cell, I could hear the distant, rhythmic roar of the crowd in the village square. Julian Thorne was a gifted orator, and he was using his sister's death to paint Silas as a mate-blinded traitor who had abandoned his duty for a worthless Omega. The blood of a Thorne cries out for vengeance. I heard him scream during a midday rally. If our Alpha is too weak to uphold the ancient laws, then he is no Alpha at all. We are being led by a man who shares his bed with a murderer. Inside the manor, Silas was a man possessed. He had ignored the council's repeated calls for an emergency meeting, locking himself in the ancient archives, a labyrinth of scrolls and ledgers that dated back to the founding of the pack in the 1700s. Sarah, the pack healer, came to my cell twice that day. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and hands that smelled of lavender, sage, and golden seal. As she applied a cooling salve to my raw wrists, I noticed her hands were shaking. The Alpha hasn't eaten since the execution, she whispered, her eyes darting toward the heavy door. He's been going through the old birth records. Records that were supposed to have been destroyed during the Great Fire 40 years ago. He found a hidden compartment in the vault, Elena.
Why?
I asked, wincing as the salve touched the blackened skin. What does that have to do with Clara?
I don't know,
Sarah said, her voice dropping to a breathy murmur.
But he's also been talking to the pups.
Little Mia, the baker's daughter, she was out late that night, looking for her lost kitten near the Omega quarters. She saw something the guards didn't report. Later that evening, Silas returned to my cell. He looked even more ragged than before, his eyes bloodshot, but there was a new, sharp focus in his gaze. He signaled the two guards at the end of the hall to leave. They hesitated, but one look at the Alpha's bared fangs sent them scurrying. Mia saw him, Silas said, sitting on the cold stone floor outside my bars.
He didn't seem to care about his expensive suit or his dignity anymore.
She saw a man leaving your cabin 3 minutes before Julian raised the alarm. She said he was wearing a heavy, fur-lined cloak, but the wind caught it as he ran toward the council hall.
She saw a scar on his jaw, Elena.
A scar in the shape of a crescent moon. My breath hitched in my chest. The crescent moon. Silas, that's the mark of the Blackwood enforcers.
Your personal guard.
Only your most loyal warriors have that. Exactly, Silas said, his voice like grinding stones. There are only 12 men in the entire pack with that mark. Julian Thorne is one of them. But he had an alibi, he was supposedly leading the border patrol 5 miles to the north.
He could have slipped away, I said. He's fast, Silas.
Everyone knows he's the fastest runner in the pack. There's something else, Silas said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, crumpled scrap of fabric. It was high-grade, dark silk. I found this caught on a jagged nail in the floorboards of your cabin while I was investigating the scene today.
It's not from an Omega's tunic.
And it's not from a warrior's uniform. This is the ceremonial silk used only by the High Council during ritual nights.
The elders, I whispered.
Elias, or someone very close to him, Silas said.
But the motive doesn't fit. Why would the council want Clara dead? She was the daughter of their most powerful ally. She was the perfect lunar elect.
She was pure-blooded, wealthy, and politically loyal. Maybe it wasn't about Clara, I said, my mind racing through the few memories I had of that night. Silas, before she died, she looked at me with so much urgency. She tried to say something, but the blood, she managed to whisper, the silver isn't the end. I thought she was talking about the dagger, but maybe she meant something else. Something about the silver itself. Before Silas could respond, the heavy iron door at the end of the corridor was kicked open with a resounding, metallic boom. Julian Thorne marched in, but he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 4 enforcers and Elder Elias himself, the old man clutching his silver-tipped staff. Alpha Silas, Elias said, his voice dripping with a false, oily condescension. The council has reached a unanimous decision. Your refusal to execute the prisoner has been deemed a violation of the sacred Alpha Oath. You are officially compromised by the mate bond, and thus, your judgment is no longer sound. Silas stood up, his height dwarfing the elder. I am the Alpha of the Iron Ridge. My word is the law in this territory. Not when the Alpha is bewitched by a killer, Elias snapped, holding up a heavy parchment stamped with the pack's ancient wax seal. According to the bylaws of 1840, bylaws your own great-grandfather signed, in cases of mate bond corruption, the High Enforcer takes custody of the accused until a formal tribunal can be held.
Julian Thorne is the High Enforcer. Step aside, Silas.
Julian stepped forward, a cruel, hungry smile stretching across his handsome face. He held a pair of silver-lined shackles, the metal gleaming in the torchlight.
I'm going to enjoy this, Elena.
I'll make sure you confess to everything before the sun comes up. The tension in the room was a physical weight, like the air before a lightning strike. Silas's wolf was snarling, his fangs beginning to lengthen, his eyes glowing gold. I saw his hand drift toward the heavy combat knife at his belt. If he fought them here, he would be labeled a traitor. The pack would fall into a bloody civil war that would destroy us all. I challenge, Silas said. The words echoed like a gunshot through the stone hall.
Julian froze.
You what? I call for a trial by moonlight, Silas said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that made the guards flinch.
3 days from now, on the night of the blood moon.
I will present my evidence to the entire pack at the judgment circle. If I can prove Elena's innocence, she is cleared and the real killer takes her place.
If I fail.
If you fail, Elias interrupted, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, you both face the blade. You will be stripped of your title, your lands, and you will die alongside her as a disgraced Omega. Do you accept these terms, Alpha?
Silas looked at me.
In the dim torchlight, I saw the silent promise in his eyes. He was gambling everything, his life, his pack, his 500-year legacy, on a girl who had been nothing but a ghost to him 48 hours ago.
I accept, Silas said.
Fine, Julian said, his eyes gleaming with greed.
He already saw himself wearing the Alpha's cloak. 3 days.
But she stays in the high-security suite, not this hole.
And she stays under my guard.
She stays in the Alpha's suite, Silas countered, his voice leaving no room for argument.
Under my guard.
If you want her, Julian, you'll have to walk through me to get her. And I don't think you're ready for that fight yet. Silas moved me that night, but not to a guest room. He took me to his own private suite at the very top of the manor, a place where no Omega had ever set foot. It was a space of dark wood, worn leather, and the heavy, comforting scent of sandalwood and cedar. The guards at the door are the 4 men I'd trust with my life, Silas told me as he locked the heavy oak door. But don't go near the windows, Elena.
Julian has positioned snipers in the tree line across the valley.
He knows he only has 3 days to make you disappear before I can speak to the pack. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat on the floor of his study, surrounded by the dusty, crumbling ledgers Silas had smuggled out of the archives. He had been looking for a motive, a reason that would link the council, the Thorne family, and the murder of Clara. Elena, I found something that shouldn't exist, Silas said around 3 in the morning. He held up a yellowed, fragile map that felt like it would turn to dust if he breathed too hard. This is a map of the Blue Ridge territories from before the Great Purge of 1924.
There's a third bloodline mentioned here. Not the Blackwoods, not the Thorns.
The Silverist. I've never heard of them, I said, leaning over the table. In school, they taught us that there were only 2 founding families. That's because they were supposed to be extinct, Silas said. The Silverist were the original Alphas of this entire mountain range. Legend says their fur was the color of the moon itself, and they possessed a power that could command the very elements. But 40 years ago, the ancestors of Elias and the current council staged a coup. They claimed the Silverist were tainted by dark magic.
They hunted them all down. Or so they thought.
He turned to a page in a birth ledger from 23 years ago. The ink was faded, but the name was written in a bold, clear hand.
Elena Silverist.
Daughter of Alaric and Serafina.
I felt the room spin.
My breath came in short, shallow gasps as the foundations of my life crumbled.
My mother, her name was Sarah. She was just a laundress.
Serafina, Silas corrected gently, his hand covering mine.
She went into hiding as an Omega.
She used the simplest version of her name to survive. Elena, look at the description of the Silverist heir's awakening in these scrolls. He read from an ancient, handwritten text. The Moonchild shall walk in shadows, her power locked in a cage of mundane blood. The wolf shall not wake until the bite of the silver blade touches the skin of the chosen heir. Only then shall the true Alpha return to the mountain. I looked at my hands, which were still stained with the residue of the dungeon.
They were trembling.
The execution.
Miller's blade. It was 1 inch from my throat.
I felt this sudden heat.
Like a sun was exploding in my chest.
I thought it was just the terror of dying, Silas.
I thought my heart was giving out. It wasn't fear, Silas whispered.
He reached out, his thumb brushing the mate mark on my neck, which was glowing brighter now. The proximity to the silver claymore triggered the awakening. The council has known who you were since you were a toddler, Elena. That's why you were kept as an Omega. That's why you were fed vitamin supplements every morning since you were 5. Sarah told me about them once.
It wasn't vitamins.
It was trace amounts of silver powder mixed into your food. They were keeping your wolf poisoned and suppressed so you'd never shift. So you'd never realize you were the rightful ruler of this pack. And Clara found out. I realized, the pieces finally clicking together with a sickening thud. She was the one who worked in the archive offices during her internship.
She must have found these same records.
She was coming to my cabin to tell me the truth, wasn't she? She was coming to help you claim your throne, Silas said, his face a mask of cold, white-hot fury.
And Julian found out.
He killed his own sister to protect the council's secret. Because if the truth comes out, the Thorns lose their status as the second family, and the council loses their puppet master power. They didn't just want you dead because of a murder, they wanted to finish the purge they started 40 years ago. Silas pulled me into his arms. For the first time, I didn't feel like a weak Omega clinging to a powerful Alpha. I felt like a queen finding her king. The mate bond wasn't just a biological pull, it was a recognition of equal souls. We have 48 hours until the blood moon, Silas said against my hair. Julian is going to try to provoke a shift or an accident before the trial. If you shift into a silver wolf in front of the pack, they'll know the truth.
He cannot let that happen.
Then we don't wait for him to come to us, I said, looking up at him with a fire I'd never known I possessed. We're going to burn their world of lies down, Silas. Together.
5. The blood moon rising.
The night of the blood moon arrived, and the sky over the Blue Ridge was the color of a fresh wound. The moon hung low and heavy, a swollen, crimson orb that seemed to pulse with a dark, ancient energy. The entire Iron Ridge pack, nearly 1,500 wolves, was gathered at the summit of Judgment Peak. The atmosphere was thick with a toxic tension, the air smelling of ozone and the nervous sweat of 1,000 shifters. Silas stood in the center of the ancient stone circle, his midnight black alpha cloak billowing in the mountain wind like the wings of a predatory bird. I stood beside him, dressed in a simple white tunic that Clara had given me for my birthday months ago. I looked fragile, like a lamb led to the slaughter, but inside, I felt like a coiled spring of silver and fire. Alpha Silas. Elder Elias stepped forward, his silver-tipped staff thumping rhythmically against the rock.
The time has come. You have failed to produce any new evidence.
The pack demands justice for Clara Thorne. Will you fulfill your oath as leader, or will you fall with the murderer?
Julian Thorne stepped into the circle, his sword drawn and gleaming red in the moonlight. He looked at Silas with a smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes. Give it up, Silas. You're a dead man walking.
Just hand the Omega over and maybe I'll convince the council to let you live as a lone wolf. I have the evidence. Silas roared, his voice amplified by his alpha power until the trees themselves seemed to tremble. I have the birth records of the Silverest line. I have the fabric from a high council robe found in the crime scene. And I have a witness who saw a man with a crescent moon scar leaving the cabin. The pack began to murmur, the sound like the rustling of 1,000 dry leaves in a storm. Lies! Elias screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. The records were destroyed decades ago. You are hallucinating because of a corrupted bond.
Guards, seize them both.
Then let the moon itself decide.
Silas shouted. He looked at me. It was the signal we had practiced in the quiet hours of the night.
I stepped forward, leaving the shadow of the stones and walking into the direct path of the blood moon's crimson light.
I felt the silver poisoning in my veins finally shatter.
The 20 years of suppression, the silver powder, the ropes, it all evaporated under the gaze of the moon. My blood began to hum, a high-pitched vibration that made my teeth ache. It felt like my very marrow was turning into molten mercury. I looked at Julian, and for the first time in his life, the High Enforcer looked truly afraid. You think I'm an Omega? I asked, my voice echoing with a power that wasn't mine alone. You think you can bury a queen in the dirt and expect her not to grow?
I didn't just shift. I exploded.
A howl ripped from my throat that wasn't a cry for help. It was a command that resonated in the souls of every wolf on that mountain. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in the Blue Ridge for 100 years. My bones cracked and reformed in a split second, a painless transition of light and energy. My skin didn't sprout brown or black fur. I was covered in fur the color of a blinding, brilliant moonbeam. I was massive, nearly 7 feet at the shoulder, a silver wolf that radiated an ethereal, terrifying light that pushed back the shadows of the night. The pack fell to their faces.
It wasn't an alpha command from Silas. It was ancient, genetic memory. The Silviest had returned.
Julian tried to shift, his movements clumsy with panic, but he was too slow. I lunged, a silver blur across the stones. I didn't kill him. Death was too easy for a man who had murdered his own sister. I pinned him to the jagged rock, my jaws inches from his face. I reached into his mind with the true, ancestral power of the first Alpha, and I did something far more permanent.
I stripped him of his wolf.
I severed the spiritual connection to his inner beast, turning him into a mundane human, the ultimate, living death for a shifter. I shifted back, standing tall and defiant in the crimson light of the blood moon. Silas moved to my side, his eyes full of a reverence and love that made my heart ache with a joy I'd never known. "The council is finished," I said, looking at Elias, who was trembling so hard he dropped his staff into the fire. "Every record, every stolen life, every secret of the purge will be brought to the light. I am Elena Silverus Blackwood. And this pack is under a new law, the law of truth." Silas pulled me against his side, his arm around my waist, his cloak shielding me from the wind. "And I am her sword," he declared to the silent pack. "Anyone who disagrees can answer to the true Alpha and the Blackwood line together." The pack let out a howl that shook the very foundation of the mountain.
It wasn't a howl of grief anymore. It was a howl of rebirth. We had a long way to go.
We had a pack to heal from decades of lies, a corrupt council to replace, and a love to build from the ruins of a conspiracy. But as the blood moon began to fade, and the first golden rays of a new dawn touched the peaks of Virginia, I knew one thing for certain. The blade had stopped 1 inch from my throat, and in that 1 inch, I had found my life, my power, and the mate who would walk through fire to keep me. Thank you for choosing Flox's romance tale. If you enjoyed this wolf shifter romance, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.
Drop your location below. We'd love to know where our pack extends to.
See you in the next of passion, mystery, and fated bonds.